long, but it cannot be done otherwise. Imposing anything from abroad always produces very painful consequences, as it was in Iraq or in Libya. That is a consequence of a political monopoly, of a unipolar world that they tried to establish at some point. Thankfully, this monopoly, this unipolarity is almost history. I think it is very dangerous. And it's dangerous for the monopolists as well, because they lose their orientation and they start feeling like they can get away with anything and that they can do everything. And that is always dangerous, that is always reckless, and it always leads to bad consequences. But of course, now in addressing the Syrian crisis, we have established working, efficient relations between Russia, Iran, and Turkey, even though we may have varying opinions and assessments of what's going on in the region, but still we're able to collaborate. We also have good working relations with all the stakeholders of that process, including the U.S. And by the way, the American military has been much more responsible than some of the American politicians. But one way or another, it all provides an enabling environment to resolve those issues. But militarization is always bad. The Middle East is a highly flammable region, and we know the complaints against the U.S. who have been arming certain armed groups. And like I said, what's going on the left bank of the Euphrates River, what's going on right now with arms being shipped there and with money being provided to those armed groups. But unfortunately, they've been unable to handle the terrorist threats, which they have failed to eradicate completely. 700 civilians have been taken hostage. It's a disaster. So we need to work together.
Mr. President, you've been speaking about monopolism, but in the United States, back then, at the market, monopolies were unbundled artificially. Probably in politics we should resort to these practices as well, you know?
You know, they're talking about the tragedy in Istanbul. I don't know whether it really took place or not, but you know, they also say that the person was split into pieces, disembodied. And you know, splitting up, disemboweling is always a tragedy. You need to talk to people, you need to figure out a joint solution, and I think we need to work together on addressing common threats.
Okay, now, Tim Colton, please.
Thanks very much. Timothy Colton from Harvard University. I have a question about Russian public opinion. As is well known, since you became leader of the country all those years ago in 2000, you've had very steadily positive ratings in the eyes of your fellow citizens. Approval of your work in office is usually higher than 60%, and sometimes as high as 80%. So this is quite extraordinary. But Russian sociologists also ask questions, well, a number of other questions, but one in particular, which is very interesting, and that is about a question about the direction that the country is taking. And if we look back, we have this information all the way back to the 1990s. There's often a rather large difference or gap. That is, it's very commonly has been the case that support for you personally coincides with many Russians actually thinking that the country is going in the wrong direction. Now, after 2014, the so-called Crimea bounce occurred. Your ratings went even higher than usual. But at that point, for several years, more Russians, a lot more Russians, thought that the country was going in a positive direction and not in a so-called tupik. But this has changed this year. All of a sudden, it seems more Russians think that the country is going in the wrong direction, even as they continue to support you. So what is your interpretation of this disparity? Excuse me.
И сейчас поясню, что имею в виду. Ну, во-первых, 90-е, начало 2000-х годов, о которых вы тоже упомянули, они кому могут понравиться? Они связаны с развалом великого государства, огромного. Это первое. И это многим не нравится не только в России, но и в бывших республиках Советского Союза. Вы опросите там людей. И там скажут, там по-своему трактуют, но все равно считают, что в Советском Союзе были надежнее, спокойнее, увереннее себя чувствовали. Перспектив было больше в едином огромном государстве мощном. Конечно, многое меняется. Люди ощущают преимущество суверенитета во многих этих странах. Ведь все, что произошло тогда, это не просто с подачи, это по инициативе России произошло. Когда нас начинают в чем-то обвинять, кстати говоря, на постсоветском пространстве, я все время спрашиваю, а кто это сделал?
Here claims and accusations, I respond, it was us who did that, the former leadership of Russia, but still was Russia. First, this is first. Second, no one wants to go back to 1990s out of those who can still recall what was the case back then. A full collapse of the economy, of the welfare, of the health care, rampant crime, and there was no education. There was pauperization of common people, and back then, the main advances of the past years are not only about stabilizing the internal and political situation or overcoming the most acute issues of fighting terrorism on our own soil. We had a civil war in progress, hostilities, I said. No one wants to go back to that time, I'm sure. But the main thing is that the economy, we've been able to return to the economic growth, recover that, and the people's living standards have risen. Well, definitely yesterday things were a bit better, now a bit worse, but anyway, by and large, the income of our people has changed for the better. Still, we have a lot of people living below the poverty line, and in the course of the 2008 downturn, the share went up a bit, but at the turn of the century, it was 40% of people living below poverty line. Now, much less. Let's take the 2008 downturn. The living standards went down a bit. No one liked that. And I'm aware of that. With respect to the Crimea, yes, in Russia we believe it was a fair action by president and the government, because historically that country had always belonged to Russia and people wanted to come back to Russia, which is what's important. Some people try to turn a blind eye on that, but you know, the response and the opinions of people are the main indicator that it is fair. Now the government is conducting a number of painful but necessary measures with respect to the retirement age and pensions. In all the countries, it's all the same. No one is going to like that. And I understand why they are not content. But you know, our people are clever, smart. They don't like it, but they know that the government has to. No other choice. Unless we do that today, we'll do it tomorrow. Anyway, we'll have to. Because by 2024, we plan to have the life expectancy at 78 years, and by 2030 it's going to be 80 years of mean life expectancy. Anyway, we'll have to raise the retirement age. Now we have the transition period. If we do that later, we will not have that. Neither benefits, nothing. And to smoothen this transition, I came up with a proposal like if a person has reached the pension age, he or she will not be retired, but will use the benefit for paying the house bills and taxes and other things. They will have all the benefits at hand. And most of our people believe it's inevitable. They know for sure. Nothing to be happy about, but still they have this understanding. It is a key point. People should have confidence in what the government has been doing. And I believe that we haven't lost this feeling and this feedback. I believe this is the main fact of our domestic political life. Sabine Fischer on the back stalls. Thank you, Sabine Fischer, Berlin. Mr. President, I want to follow up on the Russian society debate. Last week, the Civic Initiatives Committee made public a report saying that in the Russian society, appetite for change has been increasing, which has been reflected in the recent opinion polls. What is your vision of the change in public sentiment? What do you want to do to respond to that? I think it's absolutely natural. Like, people want change. Don't German people want change? Let's look at the outcome of the Bavaria election. It's so clear whether they want change or not. In Europe, everybody wants change. The United Kingdom voted in favor of Brexit. Unbelievable, but they want change. We want change as well here. But the vast majority of our nationals don't want the revolutionary change, no. We're fed up with revolutions. We've had plenty of them in the 20th century. And we have had them over the top in our newest history. So anyway, what we need is to have the timely change, what we have been doing, by the by, and in close contact with the civil society, which is the main guarantee of the success of our internal policy. Mr. President, do you want any change personally? I want us to conclude the debate, discussion, because I must be off for Uzbekistan, and I want to play hockey before that. Quite appropriate time to ask. Just several more questions. Thank you, Mr. President. I think we wouldn't have the full-fledged talk, but let's mention Ukraine. Without that, we wouldn't have a complete discussion today. Sergei Viktorovich discussed the homeostasis situation in great detail, but will you utter some words of optimism? And the authorities of my country have been doing their utmost to deadlock the issue. The United States and the person of Walker put their shoulder to assist that, and the Normandy format is at a standstill, and nothing has been happening there. Do you think there may be, in mid-term, there may be chances to have the things unlocked and ironed out? It's a festering sore, a wound in our relationship. I will just have to repeat what I said before. We know that the thorniest issue here is the Donbas crisis, and I think that many will concur. Like organizing terrorist attacks and assassinations of representatives that have been elected by the local population to rule these regions on the part of the special services of Ukraine is the worst way to get along well with those territories. The best way is to deliver upon the Minsk set of measures. No one made them subscribe. It's a trade-off document. One could rattle on for hours, but the Ukrainian authorities of today are not going to implement the Minsk arrangements because of their political situation, the forthcoming presidential and then parliamentary election that ties the hands of all the political forces. Because any step towards the opposite side, and you know better than I do, will be deemed as high treason. Can one count upon the execution, implementation of the Minsk set of measures? Within this context, we should only desire and wish one thing. There should be no temptation, there should appear no temptation to aggravate things and use the aggravation in the internal political struggle in the view of the presidential and parliamentary elections. This is what we have been thinking about, and this is our plan maximum. And the Russian Federation wants the full-fledged, definitely, recovery of a relationship with Ukraine. And currently, the Ukrainian regime is not merely deadlocking the situation.
They're conducting an anti-state and anti-public policy the same way that it was trying to be done by Saakashvili in Georgia. He tried to do the same by attacking the South Ossetia. As a result of those basically criminal actions, Georgia has lost significant territories. As a result of Saakashvili's actions, this is the result of his work. It would be very sad if today's Ukrainian authorities would follow in his footsteps. I hope that that would not be the case. But what has happened over the past time in social sphere, in economics, what's happening there? What we see is deindustrialization of the Ukrainian economy. There is basically no investments coming. They're just talking about investments, but nothing is taking place in reality. How can you work with an economy that is always shaken by some kind of shocks or undermined by domestic political crises? And there is also a war hysteria being mongered, and all things have been destroyed. Where is that shipbuilding industry that Ukraine was proud of? Where is the aircraft building industry, which was created by the whole Soviet Union throughout decades? What about space shipbuilding? It has also been lost. And the same goes for every part of Ukrainian pride of the past. And what's happening is what I have been saying. I'm saying it just out loud here, but I wanted to ask you rhetorical questions. Why did our Western partners need that? Especially the previous leadership of European Commission. Why did they have to insist on such a hard choice of hard engagement of Ukraine in the European Association? What did that give to Ukraine? The open market? So they're asking for Ukraine to bring out round timber. But it's not Siberia, 3 or 4 years of work, and they're going to destroy all of the forests. And now Western partners are asking for GMO products in agriculture. Then we'll have to close up borders because GMO is prohibited in our country. Now they're going to take out Chernozem, the black earth soils, out of Ukraine. Therefore, I believe that today's policy of Ukrainian authorities is aimed at what? What are they trading with? They're trading in Russophobia and anti-Russian sentiments. There are no more goods there, and they're being forgiven for everything for that. Because the nightmare of our Western partners is that Russia and Ukraine are cooperating in any way because they think there will be growing competition in the world as a result of such cooperation. But we don't have the claim for that. We just wanted to have normal work. Why did they have to open up Ukrainian markets without giving anything in return? And demanding from the Ukrainian government constantly to raise the prices for gas, because they understood that the purchasing power of the population is not so high. They used to gather just peanuts for the gas industry before, and now they're basically gathering nothing. All benefits, all pensions are at zero. So we're going to have to wait for the domestic political cycle to end, and I truly hope that with the new leadership of the country, we'll be capable of building at least some kind of relations and agree on something. We're prepared for that, and we want that.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this large and deep discussion. I am in politics for 40 years. I have never seen the world so dangerous. Everywhere there is conflict, and we have a lot of threats, and we have a lot everywhere, war, school for wars. We are never school for peace. But we know that peace is not something coming from the sky. Peace is work, hard work. So I would like to know how to think that we can promote peace, how we can to promote multilateralism, to make reforms, for example, for multilateralism, for WTO, from the Security Council, how to develop the dialogue with people who are not agree. And I think it's very important to know that for people who has known the war on their country, they know that war is awful, as you said, a disaster. So, in this matter, how we can have some developing a culture of peace. That's a very big point for everybody in the social society. And so, maybe together we can make peace great again.
No, we can talk about that for a very long time. I think that the previous issues, the issues that happened in the previous years and in global affairs that you were talking about, that has to do with the nature of the world being unipolar, what seems that has happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now the world is bouncing back and it's becoming, if it hasn't become already, multipolar. And that unavoidably will bring us to understanding that there is a need to reinstate the meaning and significance of international law and universal institutions as the UN. And by building from the UN Charter, by using everything good that has happened, that has been achieved throughout previous decades, building from trust to each other, we should be very careful and cautious about those elements of trust that we still have in place. We have to learn to listen, to hear each other, to respect each other, and to be prepared to find compromises based on that. I believe that in the end it is unavoidable. And the sooner we have that, the better. We're prepared for such development of events. Mr. President, you have one question before we end our session, but I cannot give the floor to. I cannot help but give the floor to the laureate of Valdai Development. My colleague Petr Dudkevich has received the award, and it was well deserved. So I would like to give him the floor in the end. Thank you very much. Mr. President, you have been in this Valdai discussion club for 15 years already. That's a significant era, and a lot has changed. I wanted to ask you a question. So against this backdrop of 15 years, how has your perception of Russia has changed, your own country, as well as everything around it? And against this backdrop, again, how did your perception of yourself as a leader of Russia has changed? I wanted to ask you to try to avoid and not answer the second part of your question. I believe that me giving evaluations of myself, that's inappropriate. Now, as for Russia and my view, my attitude, I can say that my love towards country, and I'm not afraid to use these lofty words, my love has grown manifold. To be honest, I didn't know Russia so well. Of course, I'm a Russian, and my history, my background is from Russia. My forefathers have lived for 300 years in one village, and they went to one church. I can see that in the church documents. It's very interesting for me. I feel myself being a part of the country, of the Russian nation, however lofty that sounds. I feel that. Still, my previous life and work that mostly had to do with international affairs. You know, for almost 20 years I've worked in intelligence. And I didn't know Russia as well as I have learned about it when I came to Moscow and when I started to work at the federal level, when I became the president of the country and prime minister. I saw how deep and how powerful this country is. What strong moral, historical roots it has. And I did not learn it from the books of two great patriotic wars. I did not learn that from the books, but I saw it firsthand. I saw the power of the Russian nation, and the nation being very wise. And in this regard, and it's not an exaggeration, my love for Russia has grown manifold. As for everything around Russia, there is nothing peculiar here. That has always been throughout the history of Russia. Usually we were treated more or less fine when Russia was going through hard times, and we were sent humanitarian aid, and we are thankful for that to our partners. There is no irony here. But as soon as this aid, as soon as Russia became a strong competitor in international affairs, right away there were issues being created in the path of Russian development. Looking at the logic of relations in the global arena, it is quite understandable. I guess you could understand that. How is it to have a strong competitor? It's better to move forward without any competitors, without any rivalry. But it's detrimental to those who are being the first ones ahead of everyone, alone. So, and I have said that before, despite the fact that we see a lot of threats in the world is becoming more balanced. Because the multipolar world is taking shape. And it's good both for Russia and for Russian partners around the world. And I truly expect that we can overcome the hardships of today, that we can build the dialogue with all our partners and participants of international activity. We'll be strengthening ourselves from inside. And that will give us the opportunity to foster fully fledged relations with our partners in global affairs. Mr. President, naturally, Valdai Club cannot compete with the wiseness of the Russian nation that you have learned for many years. That's not possible. But we take upon ourselves to try to challenge you intellectually. Maybe we can do that collectively. Thank you very much for giving us so much of your time. Hope to see you in a year again. And on my behalf, I would like to thank all experts that are taking part in this work, and they have been doing so for many years. Russian and foreign experts, and a special words of thanks go to my colleagues who have been in high leadership of Russia, because they have an opportunity to travel abroad and to show themselves, to prove themselves, but still they believe it's necessary to come out to Russia and to take part in our discussions. For us it is very important and very significant, because it gives us an opportunity to vocalize our position and to hear you as well. It's important for us how you actually word your questions. For us, it's also very important, very interesting. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.